in lesson 7, and I guess we'll just start at question number 1, dealing with chapter 19 and 20. It says, why did Jonathan try to persuade Saul not to kill David? Right. David delighted in, or Jonathan delighted in him, and he said David had not sinned, and he had delivered Israel with God, and he was innocent. So those are all some very good reasons not to be angry with somebody. Question 2 says, what provoked Saul's anger again after Jonathan had successfully interceded for David? So it worked the first time. What happened in between there? Verse 8. Yeah, David had another big victory. He was a hero again, and the evil spirit also provoked him. So he began to try to destroy David again. It says, what reaction did Michal have toward her father's assault against David? She helped David flee out the window. She put the image in the bed and put made it look like David was laying in the bed when the soldiers came in to arrest him. Gave him more time to get away. Let's see. Question 4 says, why would David flee to Samuel in Ramah? He would certainly be a great source for inspiration as far as hearing the word of God, and he was the one that anointed him to be king. He was formerly the judge, and if you couldn't have the king on your side, it'd be good to have Samuel's help. So he did flee to Samuel, and could have been many reasons involved in that, but that would be a great place to go. He was God's representative. And question 5 says, how did the Lord protect David at Ramah? So there are 3 groups that were sent to arrest him, and all 3 were overcome by the Holy Spirit and made to prophesy. They weren't able to approach David and Samuel, so God wouldn't allow him to be arrested, and even overcame Saul in the same way when Saul came. He also prophesied and lay uncovered there without his outer robe for a day. Then question 6 says, describe the relationship between Jonathan and David. What is said about their relationship there in chapter 20? Very close. They loved each other. They had a covenant with each other. They promised to be faithful in keeping their word concerning the protection of one another and their children. So they were very close in their love for one another. Let's see. Um, 7, it says, what test did David devise to learn Saul's disposition toward him? He needs Jonathan. Jonathan doesn't seem to think his father would really want to kill him, but David gives him a test to go and find out. Remember? Pardon? Yeah, he asked, so David wasn't at the meal and said he went to Bethlehem to a feast, and he'd been given permission by Jonathan, and we'll see how he reacts to that news. And if he is furious, then you'll know that he means to kill me. It says, what covenant did Jonathan require David to make with him? I kind of mentioned this already, but so not cut off his loving kindness from Jonathan in his house. He knows that David one day, he seems to foresee that David's going to be the king someday, and that when he becomes king, not to forget his loving kindness. Describe the signal agreed to between David and Jonathan by which David would know Saul's attitude toward him. Right. They fall short or to one side, everything's safe. If they go beyond you, then you should flee. I say that. Says, how did Saul react to Jonathan's explanation of David's absence from the feast? Huh? Yeah, he got so angry that he tried to kill him, hurled a spear at him, cursed his mother, and by implication cursed him because he had sided with David. And says he was disloyal. And then 11, the last question here, says, describe the parting scene between Jonathan and David. Now, David came out from hiding when he got the message, bowed down to him, and then they wept, David more so, when he was having to leave and go away. They talked about, again, remembering the covenant that they had made. Okay, so that brings us up to chapter 21, and David's troubles are just beginning on this, having to flee from Saul. He's going to spend a number of years living on the run from the government and having all of these government enemies against him, all of those that are in the service of Saul, and all kinds of lies told about him. And he knows eventually that God has anointed him to be king. So, he has that information and trust in God, but now he's got to go through this period of trial where he doesn't know, what all's going to befall him before he reaches the throne. Well, very difficult. I mean, you think about yourself, your late teenage years, college years, that's what David's in. That's how old he is. And he's having to run for his life. He's having to live out in caves and wherever. He's going to be the future king. He's a holy, righteous man, faithful soldier, and now he's on the run. So just think about the temptations that would be involved to be discouraged, to have your faith tested. And that's certainly David's going to go through that. All of this will be a training for him for later, right? You go through hard times and discipline, and God allows bad things to happen to good people in order to make us stronger and bring us out like, bringing out the pure gold or pure silver by putting it through the fire, burning out all of the imperfections. So David makes a lot of mistakes, and there's no doubt that his faith is up and down. It's not perfect, but he's not any different than the rest of us, is he? We're not any of us perfect. The only one that's perfect is Jesus Christ that never made a mistake. And the Bible tells you exactly how it happened. Even to the greatest heroes, it tells you about the things that they were exceptional at, and it tells you the things where they fell short. And they're all recorded there for us to think about, learn from, the good, the bad, about what happened. And even the best of heroes are going to do things sometimes that disappoint you and let you down. But it's what David does afterwards each time that really matters. I mean, he comes back to God. He never gives that up. Even though he makes mistakes, he grows weak sometimes, just like we do. He keeps coming back to God. He keeps remembering God's got that promise for him, that he's going to be the king. And so he keeps recovering each time he makes a mistake. And it just tells us, like I say, the way that it happened, the way that it is. So David goes to Nob. What would be another good place to go? Well, you can't stay with Samuel. That's going to get nothing but trouble for Samuel. And so now he flees to the next place, and what would be another good place? Go to the high priest. Go to the tabernacle. So the house of God. That's a good place to go. You're going to try to get some help. So he goes to see Ahimelech, and he's given some consecrated bread there. He's on the run, doesn't have time for provisions. He has other men that are fleeing with him. And then one of Saul's servants sees him, though, when the high priest helps him. And that's going to come back with serious consequences in the next chapter. So David is also given Goliath's sword. So we read about his, getting the things that he needs. Nob is just a little ways outside of Jerusalem. See there on the maps, about 2 miles from Jerusalem. And it's, the tribe of Benjamin is up there, and Saul's capital, he's from Benjamin, is in Gibeah. And then Paul, he was at Ramah with Samuel, and now he comes down to Nob, which is just a little ways outside Jerusalem. And that's where the tabernacle is at, and the high priest and the priests are there, and he's going to seek aid from these servants of God. And chapter 21, verses 1 through 6. Let's read the account there. It says, Then David came to Nob to Ahimelech, the priest, and Ahimelech came trembling to meet David, and said to him, Why are you alone and no one with you? And David said to Ahimelech the priest, The king has commissioned me with a matter, and has said to me, Let no one know anything about the matter on which I am sending you, and with which I have commissioned you, and I have directed the young men to a certain place. Now therefore, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever can be found. And the priest answered David and said, There is no ordinary bread on hand, but there is consecrated bread, if only the young men have kept themselves from women. And David answered the priest and said to him, Surely women have been kept from us as previously when I set out, and the vessels of the young men were holy, though it was an ordinary journey. How much more then today will their vessels be holy? So the priest gave him the consecrated bread, for there was no bread there but the bread of the presence, which was removed from before the Lord, in order to put hot bread in its place, and when it was taken away. So he comes there to Nob to be with the high priest there. Nob means, the word Nob means to be high, so it was a high place where they had the tabernacle set up, and the priestly city. Ahimelech is the high priest. He's the father of Abiathar, and Abiathar is going to be coming to David later, and he has the ephod, the high priestly garments, and he's going to take over as high priest. All of these priests that are at the temple where David gets help, they're all going to be killed by Saul. Isn't that a sad thing to think about? And all of this because they helped David. He kills them, not just them, their families, their little children, everybody, because he helped David. How nutty can a person get with jealousy when they leave the Lord? Saul left God, and he just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. Okay. All righty, let's see. I thought somebody was making a comment there. Well, Jesus said he had his men with him. And so his men weren't with him at the tabernacle. He said his men were going to meet him somewhere else, so he was getting food for himself and his men. But Jesus says, and of course the Lord Jesus is infallible, he says David and his men were given that bread. So there's no question that when David said, I've got some men, he really did have some men. They weren't physically with him, but they were going to meet him down the road somewhere. So, so he has, you can imagine David as a great hero and general and all, that he'd have some real loyal lieutenants that would go with him when he had to flee. And so he has some loyal men. Not very long, he'll have 400 men that are with him. So it's not going to, David is, people are going to rally more and more to David as the story goes. But look at what Saul is doing. Do you want to stay on the side of the guy that kills all the priests for no good reason? Or you think maybe you might side with David after a while and think this guy is the one really that we should be following. So he comes on this, and he tells the priest he's on a secret mission. And there's Almost all the commentaries say, well, David was fleeing for his life, and this was a lie that he told the priest in order to get some help. He didn't want to have the priest get in, maybe he had, telling a lie for what he thought was a good reason. Why get Abimelech in trouble by helping David flee from Saul? So he tells him, I'm on a secret mission for the king. And maybe that is what happened. There's others that think maybe David had, in addition to telling the truth about the men that were with him or that he was going to meet, that he had maybe a secret mission previously before all of this broke out. And he's using that as a reason. But either way, he is not telling the high priest the whole story. He's not telling him, I'm fleeing from King Saul. And it's going to come back to lead to the death of the priests, even though the priest doesn't know anything about what's going on. He just thinks David is serving Saul. So David's going to feel responsible that he ever even went to the temple in the first place. And wouldn't you? If you went and you got some help, and because people were after you, all these other people get killed. So, I mean, all of us would feel guilt over that. Feel like, I shouldn't have ever went there. I shouldn't have ever involved them. Even though you couldn't foresee it. Really, how could David know that Saul was that jealous and that crazy that he would kill all these priests? But he is under great strain. And of course, the standard, that he is living under here in the Old Testament is not the perfect exalted standard we have in the New Covenant. The revelation we have is the ultimate level of holiness that's required of us and what we're to do. And so in looking at David, he certainly falls short on telling the truth all the time when he's trying to get away here. But he is, you have to judge him based on his time. And God doesn't seem to hold this against him as far as we can tell. I mean, there's this not brought out as this great error in him, but it certainly falls short of what Jesus Christ is and what we think of the standard that Christians live by. So some suggest maybe he had some kind of mission that was given to him before he had to flee. But anyway, he did have men that were going to meet him, according to Matthew. And he asks also for these provisions. He asks for 5 loaves or whatever you have. And the high priest tells him that he doesn't have any regular bread, but the bread of presence, the bread on the table of showbread that sits in the tabernacle in the presence of God, that ceremonial bread. They have those loaves have just been changed out, and they put new loaves there that are hot. And these have been before the Lord for a week. At the end of the week, I'm sure it wasn't too tasty of bread. I'm sure it's been sitting out for a week. The picture of these loaves is like a half a gallon to maybe a full gallon of flour for each loaf of bread. So we're talking about big loaves of bread that are stacked up. But anyway, he has that bread, and the priest says that in the law, the priests were to eat that bread. But in this emergency situation, he's going to give it to David since he is on a mission. And so he tells him he can give him the bread. And the men, as long as they're ceremonially not unclean. And one of the laws of God is if there's any kind of sexual emission by a man, if he's had sex with a woman, or even a nocturnal emission or whatever, he's unclean to be able to come to the tabernacle or whatever. So if these young men had sex with anybody, otherwise they can't have the bread. So that's kind of the minimum standard, I guess, that's set forth. In the pagan religions, they would actually use sexual relations in their worship. God's law, it's the very opposite. He makes sure that has nothing to do with approaching God in worship. So he says, no, they are not unclean in any way. And so he's given this help from these ceremonial pieces of bread that have been left over there at the tabernacle. And of course, it was unlawful according to law for anybody else to eat these things. But the high priest comes to the judgment, and evidently David agreed with it, that under an emergency circumstance like this, you could eat it. And he gives it to him, and he takes it. You remember when the disciples were passing through the grain fields in the New Testament, and they were eating the grain on the Sabbath day. And Jesus is being reproved, and his disciples are being condemned by the Pharisees. because they're getting the food, the grain that's sticking out over the road. They're rubbing it in their hands and eating it. They're hungry. They're serving the Lord Jesus Christ and going with him. And he reminds those Pharisees, they justified David in being helped under that emergency situation. They approved of that. But yet they're condemning Jesus' disciples when they're on a holy mission. They're hungry. They're serving the Lord. He points out the priests at the temple. They work on the Sabbath day because they have a higher law that's given to them to work in serving the temple. Jesus says somebody greater than the temple is here. So if my disciples are serving me, and I'm greater than the temple, and it's all right for the priest to work at the temple, these servants of mine, they also should be justified. And then he says you should learn the commandment that God wants mercy more than sacrifice. He quotes the book of Hosea. So he shows that when there are two laws that come into conflict, you side on the side of mercy. Here are these men that are in need, and under ordinary circumstances, you don't give the showbread to anybody. But in a time of emergency, David, in this situation, and his men, the priest said it was all right, and Jesus uses that to teach us in the New Testament. So there are emergency circumstances where you set aside ceremony or the ordinary things in order to take care of being merciful for people's lives. I mean, we think about, there are rules on, why we built this building and why it's here. It's not here to be a hospital, right? It's not here to be an emergency room. But if a plane crashed down here and they want to bring the bodies in, they could bring them right in here and treat them, right? I mean, it would be a totally unique situation where we'd do whatever it was to save those people's lives. And that's sort of the circumstances here. Yeah, they had replaced the actual bread that's set. But what they did with the leftover, I mean, when they took it away, it says the priests were supposed to keep it. So that's the thing. But they say, in this circumstance, we'll give it to you. Also, they inquire of God that day. Now, we don't say it here, but later on, Doeg is going to say that the high priest inquired of God for David. So maybe God even approved, told them it was all right to do it. I don't know. It doesn't say in the text. But they did talk to God, and God responded that day somehow about something concerning David. And so that is another thing from 1 Samuel 22:10 to bring in. Well, unfortunately, Doeg is there. He is the chief shepherd of Saul. He's there. Maybe he's unclean. He's waiting to offer a sacrifice. He's detained there at this place when David is there. And you never know who's watching when something happens. So, verse 7 says, Now one of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg, and the Edomite, the chief of Saul's shepherds. So here you have this foreigner who evidently is a proselyte and a servant of Saul. One thing that we'll read a lot about in studying about David and Saul and other kings is that they had special bodyguards of foreigners. If you're a king and you've got a bodyguard and you've got these people that are only loyal to you, that have come from another country, you can see why that might be helpful. They're not loyal to any tribe or any family. They're loyal to the king. They're like the Praetorian Guard. And so he's got a special servant that's an Edomite all he cares about what Saul wants. He doesn't care what anybody else thinks. And he sees David getting helped by the high priest, and he's going to bring this up later. And it's going to lead to that horrible sin against the priests. He's there waiting for something. It's unfortunate that he is standing back there in the background in the picture watching David get the bread and get the sword of Goliath. David asks if there is a sword there. And the sword of Goliath has been put there as a trophy of David's great victory that he had won over Goliath. And when he hears that sword is the only one that's there, he said, that's great. That is a very excellent sword. There's no sword like that sword. He's happy to get it to take with him because he didn't have any weapons with him when he had to flee. So David now has that sword of Goliath. Evidently, there's nothing said in the text. We read about how heavy his armor was, how big his helmet was. We read about how much the spearhead weighed, but there was nothing said about the sword being unusually big. So maybe it was a regular sized sword, but very fancy sword, very well made. And David's happy to have that sword in his hand to take with him. And it was hidden there behind the priestly garments at the tabernacle. So he receives the sword and is able to flee. Then he goes into exile. And David's first plan now, he just went to Samuel. He went to the priest there at Nob. And then from here, he's going to travel down into the land of the Philistines to the city of Gath. Gath was where Goliath was from. Remember, he was from that city. And evidently in these days and times, it was very common. I mean, if you worked for a king and the king was out to kill you, where are you going to go? You could go and join go to the other country. They'd be happy to have you if you can't go home, So who would not fight harder or be less of a threat than somebody that's fleeing away? And so you seem to see this a lot, that other nations are ready to take people in to have them fight against the homeland. So David is hoping he can get some refuge among the Philistines. I don't know, maybe he thought maybe they wouldn't recognize who he was, or they would recognize that he's fleeing from Saul and they would take him in. But things don't work out the way David was hoping, and he has to fake madness in order for them to leave him alone and not kill him when he gets there. They recognize he's the hero of Israel. And at this time, David wrote Psalms 34. So let's turn to Psalms 34. And the Philistine soldiers evidently arrested David when he got there. So he thinks they're going to kill him when he pulls off this trick of acting crazy, and they convinces them that he's a nut, so they let him go. But God, he considers this a deliverance from God that he gets out of this mess. He gives God credit for delivering him from these people. And he wrote a psalm for all of us to remember, how he felt and how all of us should trust God and not men. It says, I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. My soul will make its boast in the Lord. The humble will hear it and rejoice. Oh, magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord, and he answered me. So we know when David was in this fix, he prayed to God, and God got him out of it. So it wasn't just he acted crazy, but God was helping him. He was acting crazy so that they bought that whole thing. He gives God credit. So again, it's providence. God working even among these earthly men and their minds to let David go. I don't know how it happens. You can't explain how providence works, but through natural means and without violating their free will, he helped David get away. And he does that when we pray. He can help us and answer our prayers. I sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me from my fears. They looked to him and were radiant, and their faces will never be ashamed. This poor man cried, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of all of his trouble. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and rescues them. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. How blessed is the man who takes refuge in him. Oh, fear the Lord, you his saints. For to those who fear him there is no want. The young lions do lack and suffer hunger, but those who seek the Lord shall not be in want of any good thing. Come, you children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. Who is the man who deserves life and loves length of days, that he may see good? This is quoted by Peter, this whole part right here. Keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking deceit. Depart from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. So he tells you need to live the right kind of life. Fear the Lord, and the Lord will help you. The eyes of the Lord are towards the righteous, and his ears are open to their cry. The face of the Lord is against evildoers, to cut off the memory of them from the earth. The righteous cry, and the Lord hears, and delivers them out of all their troubles. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted, and saves those who are crushed in spirit. And of course, David's relating all that to himself. That's what he was at this time. And look how God delivered him out of this trouble. Many are the afflictions of the righteous. Do you believe that too? Everything doesn't go good for Christians. Everything doesn't go good for righteous people. Many afflictions come on the righteous. So if your life is full of trouble, it doesn't mean God doesn't love you. He loved David, but David, his life is a mess right now. And so he says, but the Lord delivers him out of them all. That's the difference. The Lord doesn't let you fall completely. He brings you out of it. He keeps all his bones. Not one of them is broken. Who is the ultimately righteous person? Who is the righteous one? Jesus Christ. Whose bones were not broken? John quoted that right there. The cross. His bones. And he's quoting this right. And it really is ultimate. Crush his not even the who hate the Lord was served, and none of in him will be condemned. He was doing something when he got inside, and then started accusing him, and he looks like I hold on God. I don't know what he did. Man, out of it. Let's see. It says rose that been the servants of him. Is this not David? Did they not sing of as saying Saul has slain his thousands, and David turned king sky before them and acted insanely in their hands and scribbled on the doors of the gate and let his saliva run down into his beard. Then Achash said to his servants, behold, you see the man behaving as a madman. Why do you bring him to me? Do I lack madmen that you have brought this one to act the madman in my presence? Shall this one come into my house? So, how does the Lord can deliver people in a lot of different ways, can't he? And the Lord was helping him. He was using his own wits, but the Lord helped him too. And when he wrote the psalm, he said, God saved me out of that mess. So, God will deliver the righteous from their afflictions one way or another. He'll bring them through. And here this king of Gath is called Abimelech when you look at the title to that Psalm 34. Evidently, that's his official title that the kings of that city, it means my father is king. So he was called Abimelech, or he's called Achash. And David has sought security with him, but he finds out he's not secure there. Let's look at Psalms 56. It was written at this time. Now, there's little titles up above these Psalms that tell you when they were written many times. And here we have another Psalm that tells you about the state of mind of David and what he thought about all of this. You see there in the title of Psalm 56 at the end, it says, when the Philistines seized him in Gath. So again, we know when he wrote this. It says, be gracious to me, O God, for man has trampled upon me. Fighting all day long and oppresses me. My foes have trampled upon me all day long. How do you think David felt? He got kicked out. Everybody's chasing him. The government's after him. Now he's in a foreign land and they're after him. How would you feel? Well, if you feel that way, remember this psalm. It'll tell you how to react, right? Every emotion that men can have, are expressed in the book of Psalms. And no matter what your frame of mind, you can go there and find a psalm that's talking about what you need. It says, when I was afraid, I put my trust in you. In God, whose word I praise. In God I have put my trust, and I shall not be afraid. What can mere man do to me? All day long they distort my words. All their thoughts are against me for evil. They attack, they lurk, they watch my steps, as they have waited to take my life. Because of wickedness, cast them forth. In anger, put down the peoples, O God. How do you think he feels? He is a righteous servant of God that hasn't done anything to anybody. And everybody's after him, all these wicked men, and lying about him, saying he's a traitor. So have you ever felt like that? David has felt like that. And you see the kind of things he went through. But he says, what do you do in times like that? You call on God. You trust in God. Don't fear men. God is the one that can help you. You have taken account of my wanderings. Put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your book? Isn't that an interesting expression? He says, all of the tears that David is crying, it's like God treasures those and puts them in a bottle. And he remembers every bad thing that's happening to one of his people. He doesn't forget it. It's all written in his book of memories. And you're going to be rewarded for anything you suffer for the cause of Christ. It'll all come back to you in the end and more. Paul said these momentary afflictions aren't even worth mentioning compared to the glory that's going to be revealed in the end. So it says, then my enemies will turn back in the day when I call. This I know, that God is for me. And that is something to really help you out, no matter what people are doing to you, how many people are against you. God is with me. So doesn't matter how many people are against me. I know God's on my side, so that is enough. It says, in the Lord, whose word I praise. In God I have put my trust, and I shall not be afraid. What can man do to me? And then the Hebrew writer quote that and say, if God is for you, why can you be afraid? It says, your vows are binding upon me, O God. I will render thanks offerings to you. David didn't forget that either. David made, when people get in trouble and afflictions, a lot of times we make, God, if you get me out of this, I'm going to serve you. I'm going to do, right? I'm going to worship you. I'm going to give a special offering or whatever. People do that all the time. And on the battlefield, maybe they make promises like that. Well, David said, you can count on me. I'm going to pay the vow. How much did David give when the temple was built? He piled up mountains of gold that he gave to Solomon and all kinds of precious stones. David kept every vow he made to God about, you saved my life, and I'm going to be grateful when it's over. And he certainly was. He kept his word. It says, for you have delivered my soul from death, indeed my feet from stumbling, so that I may walk before God in the light of the living. So, beautiful psalms that David wrote in times of trouble. And he made him grow closer to God. I can think in my own life, can't you, of times that you don't have men to depend upon, and it makes you closer to God. You need God. And that's the way David was. He was getting stronger through these trials, and is getting closer to God. He's the one you can depend upon. So he acts insane here, and he's able to get out of this mess. He scribbles nonsense on the wall, lets the spittle run down his beard, and he outwits them with God's help. And the man says he doesn't have any interest in having more madmen around. They had, in the ancient world, if you were crazy or insane, they thought that the gods had touched you some way or another is why you were crazy, and so nobody would harm you or hurt you. I think even among the Indians in the plains and stuff, they had the same kind of idea about crazy people. So it's a real ancient idea. So once they think David's crazy, they won't kill him. So he's able to get away. So now he flees to Adullam, where there is a cave, and this cave is still there. I thought some pretty interesting pictures that you can find online about the Adullam. It's on that line, where these cities, you have the Philistine plain that's down here, and then the hill country starts. And it's sort of almost, some have described Adullam as like in no man's land, right between the two. So if you're going to hide out somewhere, no man's land would be the place, right? People used to hide out up in no man's land was the panhandle of Oklahoma, right? It was like, the reason it got stuck onto Oklahoma finally, didn't belong to any state, so people could go hide up there or whatever, and they weren't under anybody's jurisdiction while they were in that area. So that's sort of the way this Adullam is, right in that area between the two countries. And there's caves there, and he's hiding in a cave. And people begin to come to David that are disaffected in one way or another. There's the Adullam is on the top of that hill that's pictured there. And you can see sort of a wall that's been built over the opening of the cave. It's located on the east end of the valley in the side of Adullam. The place proved to be the perfect place for David to hide in his initial fight with Saul. As in today, it rests on the border between the pre-67 Israel and the West Bank, so that David's day, this site was apparently no man's land where he could stay safely out of the path of Saul and the Philistines. Today, there's many caves at the site. It's not clear which one for sure is the one that David was in, but here's one of them that's pictured there. A lot of tourists and so on go to see that cave that's there. And 400 men are going to come to him that are discontented in one way or another with Saul's rule and join themselves to David. And so Adullam is the way you pronounce that word, and it's a cave about 10 miles east-southeast of Gath where David fled. It's 500 feet at the top of that hill there. His brothers, his relatives are going to come to him there to find protection. He's going to write some psalms from that cave also. But let's... So David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brothers and all of his father's household heard of it, they went down there to him. Everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to him, and he became captain over them. Now there were about 400 men with him. So that's not, doesn't mention the women that were there also, but quite a crowd that's beginning to come to David, and he becomes their captain. Of course, that would also add to your distress in a way. Now he's not only looking out for himself, but he's looking out for 400 men plus whoever else is there. So now he's got all of those people to worry about. Well, we'll have to stop there. Psalms 57 and Psalms 142 were written while he was staying at that cave. Well, Lord willing, we can remember that and come back and look at those next time.
Be with everyone tonight, especially those who are with everyone who could make it out tonight. Announcement started. It's good to see us. It's also good to see Seth go. To see Chris made it safely back from his vacation, and also good to see Matt Castleberry Wednesday nights. Who are sick, we need to remember in our prayer. We need to remember Art. He has hip surgery coming up. I believe it is August the 8th. So keep your prayers. And also had a procedure done today. So he's not here, and I believe Carol so well either. So we need to remember in our prayers. I believe Brad and Derek today. I'm sure they're really easy to do on a day like today. So resting at home. But also need to. He's going to be leaving, I think, sometime to Colorado. So driving back home Saturday. Let's keep them in our prayers as they back home. Booked in Mark, song number 300, our invitation hymn. Larry's going to lead shortly. I didn't catch who had the Marty. Okay, prayer. And last week when I was thinking about what I was going to talk about, a rather difficult time. I had an allergic reaction to it that I was taking. I come to find out I was allergic to sulfa, and because of that, I broke out in a skin rash pretty much from my neck down to my ankles, and it was by far one of the most painful things I've been through in a long time. And I guess I've never had poison ivy, but it was probably something similar to poison ivy and a severe sunburn. But it covered every inch of my body, and I have definitely a new respect on those, and look at those who suffer every day with ailment or anything like that. But I also had a lot of time to think because it was very difficult to sleep. But I thought a lot about Christ and how much He suffered for us. And I know last Thursday I was about to the tipping point. I tried everything there was. I can no longer say I've never taken an oatmeal bath because I tried everything there was. And I thought a lot about Christ and how He could have opted out any time, or we know that He could have called 10,000 angels, but He didn't. He endured. He was obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. And that's what I want to look at tonight as by way of invitation. If you'd like to turn your Bibles to Matthew 27. Matthew 27, we'll look at Christ on the cross in verse 32. Now, as they came out, they found a man in Cyrene, Simon by name. Him they compelled to bear his cross. And when they had come to a place called Golgotha, that is to say, place of a skull, they gave him sour wine mingled with gall to drink. But when he had tasted it, he would not drink. Then they crucified him and divided his garments, casting lots, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet. They divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Sitting down, they kept watch over him there, and they put up over his head the accusation written against him. This is Jesus, King of the Jews. Then the two robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and another on the left. And those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads and saying, "You who destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." Likewise, the chief priests also, mocking with their scribes and elders, said, He saved others, himself he cannot save. If he is King of Israel, let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe him. He trusted in God, let him believe him now if he will have him. For he said, I am the Son of God. Even the robbers who were crucified with him reviled him with the same thing. Now from the 6th until the 9th hour there was darkness over the land. And about the 9th hour Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? Some of those who stood there when they heard that said, This man is calling for Elijah. And immediately one of them ran and took a sponge, filled it with sour wine, and put it on a reed, and offered it to him to drink. The rest said, Let him alone. Let us see if Elijah will come to save him. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. Then behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth quaked, and the rocks were split, and the graves were opened, and the many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. So when the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and the things that had happened, they feared greatly, saying, Truly, this was the Son of God. So thinking about all those things that Christ endured and suffered and went through, I think about that rash that I had, how small of a thing it was when compared to Christ and all the things that he endured for us and for our salvation. We know that Christ suffered a great deal physically. We know that he was thirsty. He was most likely tired running on several hours with little sleep. He was beaten and slapped and punched. We know that he had a crown of thorns placed upon his head that drove deep into his brow, nails that were drove into his wrists, into his feet. In the crucifixion of the cross alone, every breath we know was a struggle up on the cross. We also sometimes I have to remind myself how much he suffered emotionally. I know sometimes you can ask some who maybe lost a loved one. Sometimes emotionally can be just as painful as physical pain. And we know Jesus suffered a great deal emotionally leading up to the crucifixion. We know that he was betrayed by one of his very own for 30 pieces of silver, and with a kiss on top of that. He was denied and forsaken and fled. The others fled in the hours that he needed them the most. He was all alone. And we know that we just read here in Matthew chapter 27, he was mocked and made fun of, and those that he came to save rejected him and ultimately crucified him. So, and also all of this I think about while his mother, we know, stood nearby and watched, how painful, emotionally that must have been for your mother to have to watch her son die, and how painful that was. But he endured all these things and suffered all these things and never once complained or anything about it. But he did all these things because he loved us and wants us to be with him in heaven. If you're here tonight and you've not yet taken advantage of that opportunity of Christ's sacrifice and to become a child of God, there's no better time to do so than now. The baptistry is ready, and we can assist you in anything that you might need. Or if you're here tonight, maybe you have forgotten about that great sacrifice and the suffering of Christ, and have entered back into sin, into the worldly ways. Why don't you make those things right tonight before it is eternally too late? Why don't you come as together we stand and sing?
I gave my life.